Thank you, Gabrielle, and welcome everyone. You can see me, I cannot see you. It's my first time doing a webinar. This is usually a workshop that I present in person. And there I can see you, I can ask you what you're working on, and you can stop me for questions. As you heard, it's going to be a bit different today. All right. My first technical difficulty. So I want to just bear with me. Okay. I have my presentation. I'm not able to leaf through it just the way I would like. So bear with me and see if we can do it now. No. All right. Okay. We shall do it this way. Right, everybody can see my screen now? Okay. So,
we can see it.
Thank you, thank you. So, I want to introduce myself. I'm an artist, a painter who's based in Waterloo Region, and I'm currently the artistic director at InterArts Matrix. And when I do this workshop, I tell people perhaps the most important bit of information you can get is my email, because I make a commitment to everybody who attends these workshops to answer their questions. If they might have questions after the workshop, you can email me and I shall try my darn best to either answer your question or refer you to somebody who might know. So without further ado, here's what we're going to do. This workshop has 3 parts. First one, which is kind of loaded with information, is about where you can find grants suitable for what you're doing. Part 2 is about how you can write a good grant. And part 3, which is the shortest, what you do if you actually receive the grant. So it's our belief that writing a grant actually makes you a better artist, that you actually have to articulate what you want to do and kind of make a timeline, find your partners, get their agreements that they're going to work with you, and actually make a budget. And if you get a grant, you actually have to commit to doing the project. So if you're starting to, if you have a project and you think about what you want to do, there are a couple of ways of seeking funding. Public funding, which is usually through some kind of level of government, and private funding. So in public funding, there's local. Because we're based in Waterloo Region, I actually concentrate on some of the programs that are offered here, like the regional Waterloo Arts Fund, but those kind of grants are available actually in municipalities all over Canada. Not all municipalities will offer grants for individuals. You'll have to partner with an organization. So here in the region of Waterloo, we have the Arts Fund and grants from the cities and townships. Provincially, the main arts funder is the Ontario Arts Council, which funds both individuals and organizations and projects and operations. What we mean by operations are the regular kind of funding, making the functioning of an organization possible. Project is a kind of funding for something that has a beginning and an end. For organizations, there's Ontario Trillium Foundation, and it is actually financed through lottery money. And there's also Ontario Creates, which is something more advanced and only provides grants for incorporated organizations. Federally, the two funders I talk about is the main arts funder in Canada, the Canada Council for the Arts, but also Telefilm Canada and the Canadian Media Fund. There are other ones through Canadian Heritage, but I don't have time to actually go through that. And those grants usually go to organizations. So in brief, I will concentrate on grants for artists, individuals, perhaps collective and small organizations. In terms of private funding, here in Waterloo Region, there's the Kitchener-Waterloo Community Foundation. In fact, the community foundations are a North American-wide movement, and most regions and municipalities have some kind of community foundation where you can apply. The foundation money, no matter what foundation, except the ones with special mandates through the governments, but in general, foundations make grants to incorporated, registered charitable organizations. As an individual or as a collective, you will be able to access this fund only if you partner with a registered charitable organization. Here in Waterloo Region, we're very lucky to actually have a fund hosted by the Kitchener-Waterloo Community Foundation called the Musagetes Fund. And it is a fund that is dedicated to providing arts funding. An interesting funder is the KW Awesome Foundation. It is a local chapter of a wider movement called the Awesome Foundation. And this particular foundation does make grants to individuals. I will talk about this a little bit more. There are some training institutions that actually offer funding. Funding usually to do professional development or to do projects within a residency, such as Canadian Film Center, the National Screen Institute, and places like Banff. I will talk about training institutions and residencies more a little bit further on. Of course, there are other types of funding, especially from the private sector. But there are municipalities, I talked about that briefly, the National Film Board of Canada in-kind funding, or they might be offering you services. There are local organizations, for example, in Waterloo Region, the Como Studio, that might be able to give you a discount or collaborate with you on a project. Of course, many of our funders are people in the arts who do things for us for free. They are volunteers. And that kind of funding, people forget to count that. So each time you have a colleague who actually does for you that you otherwise have to buy, you should actually note it down and report it. It is important to keep track of this kind of contributions, because otherwise people will get a wrong impression of what it actually costs to make art. And sometimes you can get some donations and small sponsorship from suppliers who might give you a break on something. Again, you should report if you have a discount. It's also a contribution in kind. And otherwise you would have had to pay for this. I shall briefly talk about our regional funder, the Region of Waterloo Arts Fund, which was started making grants directly to artists. in 2003. So it's been going for 17 years. And it was the first organization in the region of Waterloo that made grants directly to artists. It was a game changer in the region of Waterloo in terms of film. We hardly had a film produced in this region, and right now we have quite a lively media sector. And they are undergoing now a restructuring. There used to be a two-stage application process. Right now it's one-stage application process, and they are going to go to electronic applications rather than paper. The next deadline is October 9th, 2020 at 4 p.m. Do remember that with electronic applications, you have to be very aware at the time of the day. When Ontario Arts Council, for example, switched from midnight to 1 p.m. on their deadline, a whole bunch of people just missed the deadline. So the Region of Waterloo Arts Fund funds individual artists and organizations. You must live and work or be based in Waterloo Region or have a Waterloo Region collaborator, major collaborator. It funds creation, production, and presentation. It does not fund any kind of educational projects, capital expenses, or operating expenses for an organization. Their motto is making art happen. So in general, it is for creating new works of art. Something that they're very, and most funders, most councils, they're very aware, and they really want you to pay artists' fees if you are working with other artists. They usually have an open house. You can meet the board, the people who will make the selection of the grants. There's a peer-to-peer support system. In other words, you can find somebody from your own discipline who can help you with your grant. There are what they call artist at large advisors. Unlike a jury in one of the arts councils, they are called in to look at application in certain disciplines and advise the board on which ones are actually on artistic merit of the applications. All right, so before we move on to Ontario Arts Council, Gabrielle, do we have any questions at this point?
Hi, Isabella. Yes, we do. We do have a question about the KW Community Foundation, but I think you're going to talk a little bit more about that upcoming.
Okay, so can we hold it till the end, or shall we answer it now?
They're just wondering if the KW Community Foundation is just for locals, and or you know, can someone from the GTA, for example, apply?
The KW Community Foundation is just for people based and organizations based in Waterloo Region. However, the person asking the question should log in on the Community Foundations of Canada, and it has a complete list of community foundations across Canada, including the ones that are based in the GTA, and they would be able to access funds this way. Okay.
Great. And then we also have a question. Do you have a suggestion on how to seek out private funding depending on where you are?
Let's save this particular question for the end, because it is, yeah, I do have some suggestions, but I would like to get through this other material first, okay?
Okay, that sounds good. And that's all we've got for questions, but a reminder to everyone that you can leave your questions in the chat feature. And also just a note, I did put it in the chat to everyone, but just in case you missed that note, that Isabella will make the slides available to those that email her after the presentation, and that you will share your email address again, Isabella. I forgot to mention that at the beginning.
All right, so moving on. The main funder in the province of Ontario is the Ontario Arts Council. There are provincial funders in all provinces in Ontario. For example, in New Brunswick is the New Brunswick Arts Board, in Quebec, Conseil des Arts de Quebec. But I shall concentrate on the place where we were from. And I'll briefly go through the eligibility for applying to the Ontario Arts Council. So you have to be a resident of Ontario for at least 1 year, or if you are based abroad, they want you to spend at least 3 months in Ontario, because their mandate is to fund Ontario artists. You have to be a Canadian citizen or a landed immigrant, a permanent resident, and it funds professional artists. So that's an interesting distinction there, because in fact, the region of Waterloo Arts Fund and perhaps other funds like that do actually fund school projects or projects run by students, not Ontario Arts Council. They want you to be a professional artist. That means you have to have been finished your school and have built a bit of a CV. That means perhaps had a show, participated in other shows, something to show that it is your intention to follow this path. And all the criteria outlining what it means to be a professional artist are on the OAC website, which I have here. And it funds both individuals and organizations. Since we are concentrating on artist-led projects, that's it funds both emerging artists and mid-career established artists. So what does that mean? An emerging artist is somebody who has been practicing for 10 years or less. Anybody who has been practicing between 10 and 15 years is considered mid-career, and 15 on you consider established. In fact, no bureaucrat is actually going to slot you. You get to slot yourself. So you can stay mid-career much longer or emerging for much longer. Some people say that in Canada, you never kind of emerge as an artist. So also you can apply in each category more than once. When I first started applying, I thought, okay, you got one emerging, then you move to mid-career. Then I realized that, oh, you can stay in emerging for quite a while. It is a one-stage application. It's done on a portal. So you actually have to go and create a profile for yourself. It's very, very easy. It's usually some kind of contact information. And once you've created a profile, it will pop up the kind of grants that you're eligible to apply for. The applications are electronic, and careful, again, it's 1 p.m. on the due date. If you make the mistake that it's the due date and you can press submit until midnight, you'll be late. The thing that I have to say about the Ontario Arts Council, where I have been on a jury on these kinds of grants, is that no matter how well written your application is, what makes it or breaks it is the strength of your supporting material. In other words, the examples of your work that show what you have done up to then. So if your work is beautiful, if you write beautifully, if your music is great, it will actually be the first thing that will make your application strong. Everything else also counts, but not quite as much as that. So I advise people to actually start an application by deciding what kind of support material they submit, and by getting that part of the application done quite early. Because if you do it last minute, it might not turn out so great. So I am assuming that most of you are people who are just starting out, and I want to quickly introduce some grants from the Ontario Arts Council that are actually regionally administered. It's a way for the Ontario Arts Council to slot some monies to be dispensed by regional organizations. So for visual artists and media artists, there are the OAC exhibition assistant grants, and they help you with a little bit of money to present your work. It's for screening or exhibitions, and they have what they call third-party recommenders. In other words, you must apply through an arts organization like a gallery or an artist-run center, and all those third-party recommenders are listed on the website. And I'm giving you here a link where you can see which region you fall into and which organizations act as recommenders. It's a rolling, ongoing deadline from September to January. Normally it's from June to January, but due to COVID, things got really kind of turned around this year. And what you need for it is a confirmation letter from the presenter or the gallery that is going to show your work, a CV and an artist statement, and some kind of support materials so that your partner can actually have a look and see what your work is like. These grants do not actually go to a jury. They're the people making the decision and recommending the grant are your local partners. Similarly, there's the OAC recommender grants for theater creators. However, you can apply through your regional theaters if they are on the list, but these ones are a bit more complicated because various theaters have various mandates. There are theaters, for example, who produce and present works by people of color or indigenous people. There are people who are presenting works by women or interdisciplinary work. So you actually have to go on the recommender's website and see what their priorities are. It is a little bit of a bigger grant than a presentation grant, and it is for you as a creator of theater. In other words, it's not really to fund the workshop, to pay actor. It is for you to create a play or to write a play, devise a play, whatever you need to do to make theater. For writers, something similar. Here, the recommenders are usually small literary magazines. And to be eligible, you have to be a published Ontario-based professional writer. So again, this one's, oh, I have a mistake. It's from September 2020 to January 2021. So these are, but besides this, there are creation grants at Ontario Arts Council for individual artists in all disciplines. There are grants for professional development and some other types of grants. I have here for the media artists a little bit more detail, and these ones are actually quite interesting grants. They have more restrictive eligibility, both around the artists and around the type of project. So what around the artist and the project, so you must be a director producer. The OAC funds only those projects where you, as a director of a film of whatever kind, or a media project of whatever kind, retain full ownership and especially make the final artistic decisions. So in the emerging, you get $10,000 in a grant with a maximum budget of $75,000, and in the mid-career and established, the maximum grant is $40,000 in a budget with a maximum of $300,000, and you must complete the project in 2 years or less. There are other grants to artists from OAC. There are artists in schools, which is now paused because of COVID. And there's artists in community, also temporarily paused. This one, the artists in schools, is usually to make a project. It's not for you to teach, but to make a project with the students. And artists in the community also is, you act as a facilitator, but the community you're working with, let's say, a soup kitchen or a neighborhood, they are the people who actually make the project. In normal times, Ontario Arts Council has a number of professional development kind of grants. Again, most of them are suspended. And they have a special envelope of funding for Francophone artists and Indigenous artists. And Compass is for arts administration. What I want to also say is that Ontario Arts Council has certain priority groups. So if all things are equal in the scoring of the grants, they give priority to Indigenous artists, artists of color, newcomer artists, and artists from the regions. That means artists who are based outside the GTA or Ottawa in Ontario. So most of us, for example, in Waterloo Region, do qualify as regional artists, and we are a priority group. For organizations or for artists who can partner with an organization, Ontario Trillium Foundation has an envelope of funding called Inspired People. And for a long time, I didn't used to talk about this in this particular workshop because I thought it's only for organizations. However, I've seen some very interesting examples of artists partnering with organization. For example, there was one artist who partnered with various conservation areas to do visual arts installations and public arts works with children about rivers and lakes in Ontario. And that particular project got funded. So quickly, I want to go, there's very much more information on the site of the Trillium Foundation, OTF, as we call it affectionately. The seed grants, which are for pilot projects, where you try out a project. A grow grant is actually taking a pilot project and scaling it up and making it over, and you get funding for 3 years as an organization. And right now, due to COVID, there's money out there to actually help arts organizations and the arts organization, the not-for-profit sector in Ontario survive the present crisis, because there's extra funds so that we can run workshops like this online, which are a little bit more work than the ones that we normally do. So you can spend a little bit of time if you have an organization in mind to collaborate with. I think the better you learn the OTF, the more likely this collaboration is to happen. OTF itself actually runs quite good workshops on how to apply. I think I recommend for anybody who thinks of working with a community group like that to actually make a point of attending those workshops. So before moving on to Canada Council, how are you doing, Gabrielle? Any more questions?
Yeah, we have had a couple of questions here. So one is around a writer looking to apply to OAC and is asking, with one commercially published book, can I still be an emerging writer? I was told by an OAC officer that I have to apply for mid-career, but I don't have 10 years behind me. Please advise.
It is the artist's choice where they slot themselves. If one book, published book, so the job of the officers, the grant officers, is to work with you towards making the best application possible. This person told you that you should go into the mid-career, then he or she is probably right? They're quite conversant with the details of the applications. So I would advise you to go with that, first of all, because the mid-career is a little bit more money. And then in the end, what you judged on is the quality of your writing. And perhaps you'll do quite well.
Okay, and Isabella, just speaking of those support materials, we had another question around support materials and what should they look like? How detailed and finished should they be for a proposed project?
All right, I will hold on to this question because I will touch on it on the second part of the workshop today, which is writing a good grant or preparing a good application. Okay.
Excellent. And then one last one just regarding Ontario Trillium Foundation. When and where do we find OTF workshops to attend?
So you can go to the OTF site, right? And they usually advertise the workshops there. You sometimes have to look for them, but there's a section called news. And there's also a section where you can subscribe to a newsletter. And if you subscribe to the OTF newsletter, they will advise you each time they have either a new type of grant coming up or a workshop or one-to-one opportunity to talk with an advisor. So that's how you go about it.
Yes, I would highly recommend getting yourself on the OTF mailing list. It really is quite valuable. And then you don't have to go necessarily looking for those things. They send them right to your inbox.
Yes.
Okay, that is what we've got in terms of questions for now. Carry on.
All right. So while we're here, I want to mention that both Ontario Arts Council and Canada Council also have newsletters, and you can actually subscribe to those, and you get what's new, what's changed, what's deadline coming up. So getting on the mailing list is a good idea. So I'm going to move on from the provincial grants to our main funder in Canada, Canada Council. Just like Ontario Arts Council, it funds independent professional artists. So professional is very much like the Ontario Arts Council idea, except they want you to have been in the business a little bit longer. It depends on the discipline you're in, but generally circa 3 years. Independent means again that you are the person who is ultimately responsible for the artistic decisions of the project and how this project will meet the public. You do not have a producer or somebody else that stands between you and your audience. Again, you must be a Canadian citizen or permanent resident. And I think the perhaps most accessible grant for people starting out on the Canada Council is the Research and Creation Grant. There's an envelope of funding that's called Explore and Create. And within that, the Research and Creation Grant goes to individuals to develop new works of art. So even if you plan to make something much more complicated in the end, if it's still in just the idea stage and you want to try things out, this is the grant to apply for as an individual. Once your idea can actually be produced and presented to the public, there is another envelope of funding, also under Explore and Create, which they call From Concept to Realization. At this stage, at this production stage, you can get grants up to $60,000, except you have to have some kind of commitment and so from a presenter. And even though they sometimes will go for self-presentation, in general, it really strengthens the application if you partner with a presenting organization. Let's say a theater in the case of a theater artist, a gallery in the case of a visual artist. Somebody has made a commitment to publish your book, or a festival or something of this kind. They want to make sure that whatever is presented is going to be seen. Just like Ontario Arts Council, Canada Council funds emerging, mid-career, and established artists. I think they're, and you will sort yourself out on their profile, which I'll talk about more. Anyway, Canada Council a few years ago decided to do away with what they call deadlines, and they will accept applications at any time. However, there are still deadlines. In other words, if your project is going to take place at a certain date, right? So let's say if you want a response on your grant in the next 6 months, then probably you will apply the next date, October 7th. But there will be another date, usually in April. And they accept the grant applications at any time. I advise everybody to actually get in touch with the grant officers in their disciplines to perhaps arrange for a phone call and chat about the project. I repeat, the job of the grant officers and the people working there is to act so to help you write a good application. Now, unlike Ontario Arts Council, it's much more laborious to create a profile for Canada Council. First of all, there's a kind of a timing thing. You have to give them about 30 days to approve your profile. So you have to work out the timing with your own timeline. So in creating a profile, you essentially told them what you do if you actually meet the criteria, which kind of pops up on your screen, and you have to submit a CV that tells Canada Council what your track record is as an artist in that particular discipline. So very careful here, because you can actually have multiple profiles. Let's say you are a media artist, but you trained as a visual artist, and you sometimes exhibit your video as installations in galleries, you could actually have a profile as both visual artist and media artist. If you sometimes collaborate with theater artists and dancers and create interdisciplinary works, you could also have a profile as an interdisciplinary artist. So do have a good look at the kind of disciplines that Canada Council has, and I do advise you to get profiles in as many as you can qualify for. One of the interesting ones is digital artist. So it's one of those most nebulous categories, I think, because there you're actually, not that you're actually a programmer or a game designer, but you work with other professionals to create projects that are presented digitally. One piece of advice I have for you as you're doing this, take a good look at your CV and make sure that you highlight or prioritize those parts of your CV that speak to the category you're applying for the profile, right? So if you're applying for media artist, that's the kind of, you want to concentrate, let's say, on your filmography, on interactive projects, rather than your exhibition history or your writing. If your profile is not approved, and that's happened, you can reapply. And usually you can contact the program officer for feedback and tell you, they can tell you, well, you're missing this bit of experience in order to qualify. So you can either realize that you have it and you haven't put it in your CV, you can revise and reapply, or you can just go out and get that bit of experience in order to have it on your CV. So that's the first obstacle. Once you're in, what pops up on your screen are the grants that you are eligible to apply for. And that's quite interesting. And besides Explore and Create, and there's also Arts Across Canada. Yes, Arts Across Canada, which are essentially travel grants, or Arts Across the World, which are travel grants from outside Canada. And there are professional development grants to a certain amount. What has emerged in the last 4 years and still available kind of until March 31st, 2021, is a grant of up to $50,000 from a special strategy fund. So I would advise you to go and have a look at this grant. And these ones are actually assessed in-house by Canada Council and processed rather quickly. And this particular fund has 3 components: digital literacy, where people get their skill on digital production up and or dissemination, connecting with the public participation and engagement, of ways of actually making your projects more findable online, and then for organization transformation component. So it's an interesting grant to have a look at, and Canada Council is running webinars on this particular funding envelope. I recommend that you actually attend one if you're thinking of applying. Very briefly, for those making film, for those making interactive projects, for those designing games, there's the Canadian Media Fund. So to apply, you do not have to be incorporated, but there are certain reporting requirements. So for Canadian Media Fund, if you get a grant, will actually make you incorporate, right, as a business. it's an interesting thing. So it's kind of a complicated application, but I know people in the region, here in the region of Waterloo, who have applied and have been successful. One grant that I love is a KW Awesome Foundation Fund. And it is essentially a pitching competition. You pitch your project online and you might be selected to pitch in person as part of a group of 5 finalists. And what happens is that before this pitching competition, the 10 people making a decision will each go to a teller, to an ATM, and get $100 in cash, which they'll put in a paper bag. And they confer after the pitches and they select a pitch, and the person who made the pitch gets $1,000 in cash. It's a vote of confidence from your community that your project is worthwhile, and moreover, that your project, a vote of confidence that you will use the money as you said you would. You're welcome to reapply as many times as you like, as long as your pitch improves. So to my, I applied twice. Once I didn't get it, and once I got it, and I must say it was thrilling getting it. It was really, and the project got made. I was really quite pleased. I said that one kind of pocket of funding that not everybody thinks about is residencies. There are many places that will actually make working space and resources available to you to actually create work. In some places, there is a fee that you have to pay to be there, but quite a few of these programs have financial assistance, so you can apply for those. There are artist in residence programs with municipalities. In our region, the city of Kitchener was the first municipality in Canada to have an artist in a residence program. And here in the region, the artist in residence is actually paid an honorarium to work in the community. And taking the city of Kitchener as an example, they also have a bit of a budget to bring in speakers or to organize shows or events. And there is a public art commission. It's really quite a good program, and I recommend you check it out. All right, so I've been going for nearly an hour here. So this is a time to take a little break. If you want to take the time to ask some questions right now, we'll come back with how to prepare a good application. All right, you can stand up, have a drink of water, and come back. So meanwhile, Gabriela, how are you doing for questions?
We've got quite a few questions coming in. So I don't know if you want to handle some of them now while people are doing a little stretch, or whether you'd like to. Are we ready to carry on?
Let's give a couple of minutes. If somebody had to have a bio break or go and get a glass of water, let's give a couple of minutes.
Sure.
We're back here at 5:56, okay?
Sounds good.
All right. All right. So, Gabrielle, what questions do we have?
Yeah, so we had a question around, someone was wondering, it was when you were talking about Canada Council, they just wondered if you could expand a little bit on what professional versus non-professional.
Okay, so a professional artist is somebody who gets paid to do what they do. Essentially, that's the definition. There's a definition from the Canadian Revenue Agency. It's somebody who is actually trying to make a living as an artist. Unfortunately, in Canada, this is a near impossibility. For example, for visual artists, the median, I say this, the median income is $7,000 from all sources of art making. So usually people fund it from other things. So second, Canada Council, unlike Canadian Revenue Agency, says that an artist is somebody who is recognized as such by their peers, right? In other words, if you have a track as being exhibited, as participating in festivals, being published, having your work screened by festivals, by galleries. So if you are in that work where works of art are being presented and your peers are actually recognizing you as an artist, you consider the professional artist. And I would say that it's probably that component that is much more important for Canada Council and Ontario Arts Council than the actual time you spend making art or the kind of revenue, the amount of revenue that you make making out of making art. Okay. Next question.
Okay, so does Canada Council for the Arts support projects settled in a foreign country?
In general, I'd say no. They do. Okay. So let's say you get an artist residency in Berlin. As a Canadian artist, you will probably get funding as long as you have all the other eligibility criteria. However, I think in the application, you have to show that whatever you're making will be shown in Canada at some point, even though it is created in Berlin, right? There are provisions, especially in media arts, for co-productions of film and other things. But the hope is always that Canadians will get to see it.
Great, okay. And
All right?
then I have, how do you decide on artist fees? Is it based on Carfax or a certain
Right.
percentage of the total project budget?
No, so depending to your according to your discipline, actually, hold on, because I'm going to get into this when I talk about preparing a grant and how you do a budget, right?
Okay, sounds good.
Okay, so I shall move on to
Yeah.
the second part, how to write a good grant. So any project can be broken into kind of smaller parts. First one is the research and creation, when the project is still at the idea stage where you don't exactly know what it's going to look like in the end, but you kind of have an idea of what you want to make. The second one is once you've gone through some iterations, you're actually ready to an experimentation, to whatever goes on in your studio, in the studio as a kind of in a lab mode, then you enter production. It's easier to think of production in terms of film or theater, but even for visual arts, you know, you're actually kind of making the stuff that is going to be presented, which is the third element of a project. Once you've made it, in order to get funding, you have to present it someplace. So presentation can be an exhibition, it can be a festival, but there is something that's called self-presentation. And nowadays it's actually quite common. For example, exhibition assistance didn't used to be given for studio tours and open houses, but nowadays it is. You still have to be recommended, but it is, you can get a bit of exhibition assistance from self-presentation also. Once you've presented the work, in other words, it has some kind of premiere, the first screening, the first showing, the first night, you might be able or want to actually take that project and show it in other places. And there is indeed grant for touring projects. If your project is invited to go to a festival, a gallery, a presenter, some kind of art fair, sometimes you're invited to participate, in which case you probably will get funded with a travel grant. Sometimes other organizations will ask you to speak about your project, your process, and again, quite often you will be able to access travel grants. Finally, in order to get an audience for whatever you make, there are some funds for marketing. I also divide projects in a couple of kind of chapters. There's professional development, and in that case, you are the project. So this is where you are learning something, where you are becoming the better artist. So both Canada Council and OAC have professional development. There is some funding for organizations, both from OTF and the Ontario Ministry for Tourism, Sports and Culture, for putting on workshops for professional development for artists. Travel, there's travel grants for you to actually learn something with someone. There's residencies. So in this case, what you have, the ultimate project is a better you as artist. And versus the project, which is you making something. So as you're getting ready to apply, you should kind of start writing and start some filing. And you kind of came up with this little table about getting your thoughts in order, and then at the same time, in parallel, getting your documents ready. First of all, you have to kind of decide what you want to do. You have to articulate it in a way, be able to explain it quite plainly to someone, and perhaps most of all to yourself. The kind of document you might want to put together is a project description, first of all, a nice title. Second, good tagline, something that is rather pithy, that can act as a subtitle. And then a word summary. This is really important. The word summary, the 1525 words, is a summary that will be much more public than you would think. If you actually get the grant, this is how your project will be identified in the published list of grant recipients. So you really want to spend some time crafting that. And finally, a one-page description will be quite useful, because that's what we will be asked in the various kind of grants. Then once you decide what you want to do, you want to figure out how much it's going to cost. Okay. So at that point, you actually also have decided who is going to be involved, who you're going to work with, right? And you're going to ask them for CVs and bios, and sometimes for letters of intent to participate in your project. Very important, don't leave this to the last minute, because people have to have a bit of time to pull all this together. But coming back to the budget and coming back to that question about how do you determine artist fees? Each one of the disciplines actually has a professional organization in Canada. Whether visual arts, for visual arts, it's Carfax, Canadian Artist Representation, Fonds des Artistes Canadiens, and they have schedule for what they call minimum recommended fees for artists. Those are fees that are paid to artists by galleries or presenters for exhibitions, but there are also professional fees that are paid for talks, for preparation, for consultation, and they do have a very handy fee calculator. For theater is the Canadian Actors Equity, which has also has a fee schedule, and those schedules are updated on a yearly basis, and you have to watch that. And as Carfax does, so the Canadian Actors Equity also adjusts the fees to the size of the producer of the theater, and they do have a special kind of fee schedule for independent productions. And they actually also have a way of doing a shared profit where you can actually pay your performers a little bit less as long as they get to share in the receipts from the box office. So you can find those. There's fees for designers from for the Association of Canadian Designers. There's fees for, so that's for light designers, sound designers, set designers, costume designers, you name it. For film and theater actors, for film and TV actors and anything on the web, there's ACTRA, and there's Writers Union, and Directors Guild, and Playwrights Guild. So you go to those places and look in their fee schedule to figure out how much your artists need to be paid. I highly recommend that you do that, because quite a few of the funders will ask you, how did you determine these particular fees, right? You have to actually provide them with budget notes saying, I'm paying these people $750 a week as an actor because I'm an independent theater or theater such a category, right? And it's in the fee schedule for equity. So you can find all those things online. Again, you need a little bit of time, so last minute will mean a bit of a scramble. Okay, also something that will help you in doing the budget is working out a timeline. For some projects, it's simple, you know. As an independent artist working alone in a studio, you start and you keep going for 9 months, let's say. It's not all that complicated. For other projects, you have to have research time, you have to have planning time, you have to have writing time, consultation with directors, designers, whatnot. All those phases of the project have to be there. And do not forget to put in documentation for your project. In other words, having some kind of video, audios, photographs of what you've made, and put that in the timeline and make sure to put it in the budget. And something else to put in the timeline is reporting. In other words, you finish the project and now you end up with your shoebox of receipts and whatever, And you look at the budget and then actually put how much is actually spent. And this will go back to the funder, right? Now, the final element is a presentation. Who's going to see it? Even if you're only applying for research and creation, the intention is that whatever you are creating will eventually see the light of day as a public presentation. And giving some thought about who is going to see whatever you make it is really important. For example, some audiences are specialized. Perhaps you're working on work for young people or children, which you wouldn't think so, but actually I've seen very few of those kind of applications for funding. I think there's a dearth of good work for young people and children. Or perhaps your audience is going to be older people, or in your community project, you are going to work with people who are deaf or hard of hearing. Do identify your audience. Okay, so we'll start again about something else that you have to get together in parallel while you're working on your project. Remember those things. There's the project and then there's you. So you have to have a kit, so to speak, as an artist. You have to have a bio in various lengths, from 25 words to 100 words to a page. You have to have a curriculum vitae, which is kind of every darn thing you have ever done, including a bibliography of reviews and publication about yourself, and keep it in various formats. Keep it as with every darn little thing, kind of a master CV, but also be ready to shorten it to require the maximum document lengths for the various agencies, 2-page, 3-page, whatever. Something very important is the artist statement. I notice funders don't call this artist statement anymore. But in fact, you will find it in applications under various kind of questions that people say, so what is your approach? What is your process? So this is something I would say that is kind of, let's say, a philosophical approach. What's your approach to your disciplines, to your mode of creation? So getting that done as a separate statement from the actual application might actually help you fill out the application. You also have to prepare and always update some kind of a portfolio. So that is a documentation, a file, nowadays online, of your past work, whether it is clips of your media work, whether it is photographs of your various works that you exhibit, whether it is a documentation of a performance, those kind of things. And you also, so this is, the portfolio is that support work. Remember we had that question, it's how the support material. This is very much the support material. And this, the support material, the funders have very specific requirements. Each one of them will ask you for a certain number of photographs, for a certain length of video, for a certain format. I will come back to that in a little moment. Some funders will ask you for letters of reference. So it is good to start kind of building the relationships with professionals in your domain who would be able to write that letter of reference. And be polite, give those people enough time to actually write something half decent. So if you're asking somebody for a letter of reference, it's a matter of courtesy that you send them a draft of the grant application so they actually know what you're doing. And they can actually write your letter of reference that's actually meaningful. not good to leave until last minute. And then something people forget is kind of have your best contact information. A number of us have studios, a home, post box office, this and that, email, basically your professional contact information that tells, so this whole thing tells the funder who you are. I will spend a little bit of time here on the philosophy of writing a good application. I call this the 5 whys. So you're sending, here's what happens in a grant process, right? You put in your grant application, and it's going to be, for example, typical for Ontario Arts Council in the visual arts, there's going to be about 200 applications. And how is yours going to stand out? And those 500 applications, it used to be that they would be sent to a jury, usually of other visual artists, in a couple of big filing boxes. And they would sit down and read each one of them and make notes. And then they would meet as a group and look at the support material, at the documentation, the photographs of your work as a visual artist, videos, whatever. So in writing your grant, you have to convince these people to actually fund you. And there are some things that you really want to get across. Why is your project important, right? And this is a question you might want to ask yourself. Why do you want to do what you plan to do? It's the motivation. Why does the world need another 20 paintings or another YouTube series or another play? You want to really kind of say, yes, we need it. And if you're not convinced, you're not going to convince us. So spend some time thinking about that. Then what you want to convince the funder is that given this particular project, you are the best person or the best organization to do it. And this is where you kind of enter in your past artistic history and you pull out those relevant things, either your training, either your life experience, your cultural background, whatever makes you the best entity to produce or research or create this project. Very interesting. If this project is so important and so exciting, how come nobody's done it before? And why should it happen now? Why can it wait? And in this, you actually have to engage a little bit with the history of your discipline, right? Especially in the part of the world where you live, in Ontario, if you're applying to Ontario Arts Council, in Canada, if you're applying to Canada Council. And kind of connect to what your contemporaries are doing. You establish a dialogue, a conversation with your professional community, if that makes sense. I think this number 4 is probably the most difficult thing, is why here? Why should your project, why a new production of Romeo and Juliet in Mississauga? How does your project connect with the place you live in and work in? And I think it really, it's really hard to answer. What it involves is a conversation with your community, the community you live in, both artistic and as audience. So it is kind of parallel of Why Now, which is a conversation with your contemporaries in your domain, and Why Here is with your artistic community and your potential audience, which brings us to what is a public element. How are you going to actually, who is your audience? How are you going to present this to people? How are they going to find you? Why is it important to your community? So I think those 5 points, if you actually kind of mull them over, will make you write a grant that is really quite superior. Back to the support material. Okay, so essentially it's documentation of past work, selections from your portfolio. And this is what I would say, you will have to invest a little bit of money in creating something professional if you are not a professional yourself. So, for example, I'm a painter, not a photographer. I'm a craft photographer. So I actually hire a professional photographer who comes in with his lights, with his superior camera, with his various way of tilting and putting my paintings so they look clear, crisp, detailed when they are seen on the screen. Same thing if you're a theater artist, perhaps you're not all that great at editing video or at taking it or recording sound. Very important for theater artists. I think I've seen a number of documentations for theater that were great to look at and the sound was crap. You have to actually pay someone to do a proper job. So professional quality, if it looks as if you just kind of lent a painting on the back of a chair and took a snapshot, it might disqualify you automatically. You don't want that. But in the end, if the painting is super, super good, if it's really interesting, I think artistic quality always will trump kind of everything. If you're a good artist, I think people will notice. You can sabotage yourself, but in the end, this is the thing that will make or break an application. In the support material, you will need description of work. There's usually forms included with the grant. If not, make sure that you actually make a list with kind of author, because sometimes there's more people working, your role in the project, title, year, medium, and the role of other artists, for example, if it was a collaboration, etc. And think of the relevance to the proposed project. As a painter, let's say, for an easy example, I'm applying to do a bunch of landscapes. In support of this, I will not put my my figure painting, right? Or if you're applying to do a documentary, you want to support it with examples of your documentary work as a filmmaker, not your experimental films. So read the guidelines very, very carefully in order to have the quantity, the format, the queuing. Sometimes they tell you, for example, OAC will tell you, send us one video, one complete work of media art that you've done. But out of that, please select a 5-minute bit. So you have to cue them, say, watch from here to here. They might watch less, actually not. They always watch everything, but they might actually watch more. And then you will have to upload or link to online files. Both, I'm not sure about Canada Council, but the standard is not YouTube, but Vimeo, right? Because Vimeo is much better in terms of for artistic work. So I noticed there's some questions coming up. So let's stop and answer some questions.
So many questions, Isabella. So, so we've had a lot of questions around, I actually think there's so many questions about this. We could almost do a whole other workshop, Isabella, just on artist fees and figuring out the best source for those artist fees. And we do have some specific questions. So should you pay yourself as an artist in a grant budget? Would you use Carfax as a visual artist?
Yes, very important, and it's something we tend to use to forget about, is that the reason you apply the grant is so you can have money, so you can have time to create whatever you're creating. Always put in the artist fees, as you as a creator may have multiple roles in a project, right? For example, a photographer, you might pay yourself the artist fees, but you also the person who does the documentation, make sure that you actually put that fee also. But there are certain kind of budget lines in Canada Council and Ontario Arts Council for what they call subsistence. In other words, they know you are taking time to actually create something and that you need that time off from your day job and whatever, or to pay a babysitter. And they actually make an allowance of a certain amount of money for what they call subsistence. I think it's $2,500 a month for Canada Council, and I don't remember what it is for Ontario Arts Council. I think it's similar. And I think they actually distinguish between living in the regions and living in the metropolitan center, where, I mean, if you live in Vancouver, it's going to be much more expensive. But there are those things, which is money that's supposed to pay your rent and buy your groceries and keep a roof over your head. There's also a line item that says studio rent. So there's those kind of things. So a bit distinguishing, you know, for the individual artist and the creation versus production, where you might have a different role, where you're the director of a film and you're getting fees as a director, which I mean, you are the director, but you have to pay yourself.
Excellent. Okay. And I did, if everyone can have a quick look at the chat feature, I have posted some links there to some of the associations like Carfax, like the Canadian Actors Equity Association. I also found a list of different writers groups in Canada, and I've attached those links, one for Canadian League of Composers, so that you can use those links as well. So there's lots of different associations. And one of the questions we have, Isabella asks specifically about this. So it says, I recently applied to OAC and requested $1,000 per week for each artist. I chose this amount because it was above the minimum for all the various organizations, and I wanted to pay everyone equally. Is that okay? Or are we expected to pay everyone according to their association minimums?
So you should generally go to the association minimum. So you should pay them at least that. If you're paying them a little bit more, that's great. However, you have to be mindful that the grant money is limited, right? And they will want to give grants to as many projects that qualify. So you have to have a very good reason for paying very much above scale, right? Sometimes they will adjust the budget a little bit. In other words, give you less money than you asked for. I think if you actually can lose some money, how shall I say, if you have some money that you think, money I need, money that would be nice to get, it would be good to do the budgeting this way. So in general, they also want to see that you have gone and checked the various schedules, because in fact, it's a signal of professionalism that you actually know what's going on there. Okay, I hope I answered your questions.
I'm just like, There's, let me clarify my question. If my end, oh, sorry. Okay, sorry, that was related to another question. Okay, we have one question around how soon before you can apply again? Does there need to be a few years gap?
No. So Canada Council used to have a rule that you could only apply once a year. Now you're eligible to apply at every deadline. So what I suggest is that if you apply for a grant and you have not gotten it, right? You actually email the grant officer and ask them for feedback on a phone call. And they will actually go and pull out your file and pull out feedback from the jury, if any. And they will actually tell you, oh, your budget was weak, your support materials wasn't great, or, you know, your project was really, really good and you almost made it and you just under where we ran out of money, which is basically says, please apply again. If you get a grant, there are some limitations. For example, in Ontario Arts Council, you cannot apply in the same year for both a visual arts and a media arts grant, right? So you have to do it alternative years. If you get a visual arts grant in Ontario, you have to skip a year. So you can apply only every 2 years if you get the grants. But if you haven't got one, you're eligible to reapply. There are some instances for media arts and theater arts where they want to see that the proposal has changed and the project has evolved by the time you reapply. Again, you will find those things out in a conversation with the grant officer.
Excellent.
Next.
Thank you, Isabella. And I think you kind of touched on this, but does it help in getting a grant a second time if you've already been a grant recipient in the past?
I would say yes, but not the way you would think. It's they don't look, oh, this person has gotten a grant in the past, let's give him another one. It's not that way. It's usually that your CV is better because you've made more work and presented more work. And probably because you had a bit of money to create something, your portfolio, your support material is better.
Excellent. And then I have a couple of questions that are quite specific to a particular disciplinary medium. Do you want to entertain those or wait till the end for those maybe?
Let's keep those until we finish the presentation, okay?
Sounds good.
Just a few more slides. All right. So you've done all this sort of stuff. You found your funder. You've got all your stuff in order. You know who you're working for, how much it's gonna cost, when it's gonna happen, what timeline is. You're ready to apply, but please, please, please read the guidelines, because you want to find if you are eligible. And in some instances, you won't be able to apply unless you're eligible, like Canada Council. But you also want to find out if your work, whatever you propose, is eligible, right? So if you're not, you're wasting your time and everybody's time. So essentially make sure that you can put a check mark to everything that's obligatory in there. What I have seen grants being basically disqualified on technical mistakes. For example, it is clear that says that the project cannot start before the grant results are announced, and somebody puts the wrong dates. It's just, you know, because in fact, funders don't want to fund your project if it's going to happen anyway, right? So make sure that the dates correspond to the ones that the funder indicates. They also want you to submit a budget that balances. If some grant applications will not let you put submit a budget that doesn't balance. They do that automatically on their form, but there's other budgets that are manual. So essentially, you want your revenue or income to match your expenses. Okay, so no surplus, no deficit. And just remember, it's never gonna come like that, because you're going to either spend more money or less money than you applied for or that you get together. But the budget is a plan, and you're actually planning to for a zero surplus and a zero deficit. That does not mean that you do not pay yourself, right? Because that is as an expense line. So, so do pay attention. Finally, do ask yourself if you can make the submission deadline. I would say it's never a waste if you filled out an application and just you didn't make it. But at some point you have to take that decision and decide perhaps to wait until the next deadline. Otherwise, you're just going to stress everybody out, including yourself and everybody in your household. So it makes for a very messy living if you're doing stuff at the last minute. Okay, finally, you're in front of the form, and I'd say fill out every bit of the form. If something doesn't apply to you, say not applicable, but do not leave it blank, because blanks might mean oversight or whatever. So do include. In a number of online forms nowadays, there's a validation steps, and they will not allow you to submit if you haven't filled every single thing. So things have changed. Quite a few of these grants, even 10 years ago, you would have done them on paper. Now with online forms, they're much more rigorous, and sometimes it really can cramp your style. And one of the styles that'll cramp is your writing style, because there's a character or word limit. And it's better to do your figuring in Word and then cut and paste into the application form, and then to edit online. They have these little windows. A tip that I actually found out fairly recently, most of those windows are expandable. They have a one corner where you can put down. You actually can see the whole of your entry, rather than just this kind of 2 or 3 lines that it shows you in electronic form. But it's much easier to do editing in a word processor than online in an application. Number the pages of your attachments so people actually know what they're looking at, and also so you'll know that you have the minimum or the maximum number of pages that are allowed as attachments. For some online applications, you won't be able to push send or submit if you have more than allowed. Copy edit is very important. It really makes a bad impression, and we think we see stuff, and stuff just gets through. Just the way I had 20W0 today for 2020. That's how stuff gets through, you know, a typo or something. So if you have the possibility of having someone else read your application, that's really useful. What you can do in almost at Canada Council and Ontario Arts Council and most of the other applications is you can have a third party, a third person who comes in. I mean, you being the first person, the grantor the second person, and this other person who can come and look at your application and suggest changes and make edits. So if you can avail yourself of this service, you can actually share the application with someone who can check it over with you. Again, once again, make sure budget adds up correctly. If it's a paper application, make sure you have the correct number of copies, collated, pages numbered. If you're submitting DVDs or any kind of, actually this is so yesterday, this was for the regional arts funds, which are changing. So nowadays it's mostly links or uploads, but do check that the links and the uploads work properly. Again, if you're doing a paper application and multiple copies, you want the application to get there without being damaged, and I'll correct in the post. If you hand deliver a application, please get a receipt, because stuff gets misplaced in the office, or if you use the mail, get a tracking number. So, and finally, keep copies of everything you submitted, either paper copies if you submitted a paper application, or a file where you have a PDF of your actual application, so you remember what you actually said you would do, including your budget. Those are crucial the time when you're going to have your final report. All right, you've done everything correctly. Congratulations, you've been awarded a grant. You get funded. So with this, there are certain obligations you're taking on. There usually is a contract you have to sign. In this contract, there might be certain things asked of you. And again, remember, an application is a proposal for a project. So some things are going to change. Some things like the budget will be adjusted. And for example, in media arts, if you're saying you're going to get all this funding, Ontario Arts Council will not release the funding unless you have the funding secured, the other funding secured, or if you haven't gotten it, if you have revised your budget in such a way as to still make the project feasible. So all those changes will go into a contract. Perhaps the start date has been moved, perhaps the timeline's changed, whatever. Next is the hardest part. You have to do the project. And again, keep track of the relevant timelines. I'd say there's considerable flexibility here, except from where for the time when your grant report is due. If you think you're going to be late there, please, please, please keep your funder informed, right? They have authority to actually give you extensions between 3 and 6 months without checking with anybody else. If it's more than that, they might have to actually put a request into a board. In general, they're approved, but you want to stay between 3 and 6 months. But anyway, inform your funder. They really usually are on your side and want to see that project done. They don't want the complication of you're having to pay the grant money back, and all that is a misery. So talk to them. They're there to actually work with you. So again, hang on to invoices, receipts. They'll be very useful, or start some kind of online file whereby you actually take pictures or scan your invoices and receipts, because you might be audited. It happens, very unpleasant, and you have to be prepared. And very important, acknowledge your funder as instructed. There are quite often charitable organizations with a foundation or a government organization, or they want to actually have their logos there to actually show that they're spending their monies in the way they are expected to, and also to encourage further applicants, right? So they want the word to go out there. And I must say they're sometimes quite proud of what we make. And finally, submit the final reports. People are kind of freaked out by the final reports. In general, they're not all that complicated. In general, they won't take you more than an hour to do, as long as you've been disciplined about hanging on to your invoice receipts and your expenses. And that, my dear friends, is everything. I realized we have only a little time for questions, but we will take it. And if I'm not exactly sure whether we can go any longer than this, but we'll try. So I want to thank you all the people at Interact Matrix who helped with this. Gabrielle and ID Exchange, Cambridge Galleries, the City of Kitchener and the City of Waterloo, which support the Interact Matrix with an operating grant, and Canada Summer Jobs, who gave us a intern this summer who has done quite a bit of work with me on this, including creating a little handy survey. So if you email me, I will send you this slide deck with all the information and a link to the survey. So now we have questions. Let's see how many we can answer before we run out of time. All right,
sounds good, Isabella. Yes, we do have lots of questions. So one quick one that is about writers. So do they need to submit hard copies of their portfolio for writers in addition to online? And that one is obviously depending on the application you're making, right? If it's an online application, you would submit materials online as a paper application. Yeah.
So for the councils, you go directly, and once you're in the application portal, so I have to make a distinction here. There are the websites of the funders, and most funders who have online application have an application portal. In order to access the portal, you have to have a profile. Very simple for Ontario Arts Council, a bit more complicated for Canada Council. We don't yet know what the Arts Fund is going to look like. Again, it depends on the funder. But once you're in, you will see very specific what the support materials have to look like. Sometimes those things are outlined a little bit in the guidelines, but I found the guidelines always fall short on the details. They usually are in the application. For writers, they usually ask for a sample of X number of pages. If you're a prose writer, X number of poems. If you're a poet, X number of pages. If you're a playwright. So they're quite strict, and you used to be able to, if you had a paper application, to kind of go a little bit over to the end of your scene or whatever, if you're a playwright, but now they really cut you off. So
they do. They cut you right off. Yeah.
You have to be sure that you format it so that things are quite legible on screen. Do pay attention to that. So don't make type very small and things like this. There's usually recommended. Those are the things that you can get by making tiny script, but don't. Somebody will have to read it.
Don't do that. Your juror will not read them, in my experience.
No, you'll piss them off.
So from a professional musician looking for funding sources to make some physical CDs and or maybe a music video, you know, where might some funding sources be?
So where is this person located? Do you know?
That I don't know.
But I will say, so there are popular music. So there's a whole music department, both at Canada Council and Ontario Council. And
there's also Factor.
There's also Factor. So I haven't covered this here, but they have a number of funds for Canadian musicians. of all kinds, right? So same for the council. People think that, oh, they only fund the classical music, new music, and all this sort of stuff. No, they actually also fund popular music. And something that I sat on a jury that I found very surprising for the touring at Ontario Arts Council. So assuming normal life will someday return, they actually have a very good touring program for musicians to help you get your work out there.
Right. Now we have media artists. So if their film or series is planned for an online presentation only instead of a traditional, say, theatrical or streaming service, does that qualify as presentation?
Yes, it does. Okay. It is, however, tricky. So it is much easier to access funds at Ontario Arts Council from the media arts for anything. But I would say that media arts at Canada Council, it's basically got barbed wire around it. Especially if you're making film and TV, especially if you're making narrative kind of films, documentaries, they actually want, in order to qualify, you have to have shown your work either in a gallery, which is the kind of easy option, or had been in a festival. And they have actually a list of vetted festivals, not just any kind of festival at all. So, but yes, web series do qualify.
Excellent. And I am just posting a link in the chat feature to all the different Awesome Foundation chapters. You touched on the Awesome Foundation. There is a chapter in Kitchener-Waterloo, but there are also chapters in Kingston, Newmarket, Ottawa, Sarnia. So if you are from one of those communities, and keep in mind, Awesome Foundations look different in each of those communities. So, you know, Isabella, what you described is how the Kitchener-Waterloo one functions. But certainly you can look those up. So, and there's direct links from that website to those other chapters. Isabella, could you rewind your what you've got on the screen there to where your email is for me? You've got
Right.
Asking.
We should go right up there.
And that way they can get a hold of you to get your slides. And also, we did have one person ask if you wanted to have a video of this. We have recorded it, and they could get that link from you. And then, oh yeah, lots of questions about your email. Can you have more than one source for funding, such as multiple grants or a mix of private investors and grant funds?
Yes. So usually for a bigger project, for an explore and create, for research and creation, you might have one or two or three funders, usually the Arts Council. But in general, if you're making something bigger, you will be cobbling together income, revenue from a whole bunch of funders. You know, first of all, the councils, but there might be private foundation, there might be donations. You might, there's actually a budget line for revenue from fundraising. You might actually put on a fundraising cook for everybody and put a jar so people can donate towards projects. You might have online campaigns. So yes, yes, yes. So it is a major effort to actually get money together for production of a good play. You know, it can range between $60,000, $80,000, and a film, as you know, can be prohibitively expensive. The Canadian first feature is really something I would recommend. I haven't gone into this in great detail, but I think it has been recently made much more accessible than it used to be. So this is through Telefilm Canada, which I haven't had in the presentation, but perhaps we'll put in. So yes, whatever ways, and for organizations, there is a budget line said applicant contribution. In other words, from your operating funds, how much money can you take and put in here? And just remember, I mean, this is how you can actually kind of leverage some of the funds, because there would be a fund for you as director, producer, artist, right? But you might also have an applicant contribution. The world is unfair in the sense that this actually gives an advantage to people who have family support. But on the other hand, on the other hand, this is why we have grants, so all of us can make work.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. We have, okay, I'm going to say that this is going to be our last question, but don't fear. If you have further questions, please look, we have an event coming up next week where you can get some more help from Isabella or from Sheila, both with InterArts Matrix in a one-on-one setting. So you can ask questions to your heart's content in a half an hour appointment with either Isabella or Sheila, and they will answer your questions more one-on-one. And, or if you know, are you like, oh, this project, I don't know if it's really suitable or that kind of thing, they can help you out with that. So we have an event coming up next week on August 27th, and there is various time slots you can sign up for the one-on-one session and get those questions, those burning questions answered. So please look for that at ideaexchange.org on our events calendar. You'll see that the grant writing clinic is what you're looking for. And we still have a few spots left there. But last question, Isabella, can you explain the third-party edits again? And I'm sorry, again, we didn't get to every question, but please do sign up for those grant writing clinics. And thanks for joining us.
Okay.
Isabella, last question, third-party editing.
So on Canada Council, there is actually a checkbox where you can say third party, and you enter the person's email, and it sends them an email and a link, and they can actually sign in and access your application. However, in order to do that, that person has to have a profile with Canada Council. That's the thing. At the same time, for all these applications, you can save them as PDFs, right? So if you save your application as a PDF, you can email it to someone and say, or print it and share it with someone who can help you.
I usually recommend that you get somebody who's not even arts related to read it over. Do they understand the project? Because one of the things we do sometimes as artists in our various disciplines is use a lot of jargon and short forms and things that only we would understand. And we have to understand that juries are very diverse, and they may not be familiar with your exact discipline. They might be a visual artist, you know, on a music jury, or especially when we're applying to organizations like Ontario Trillium Foundation or the Community Foundation, right, Isabella? They might not be artistically inclined at all. The jury, you know, would have some artistic representation, but they might not all be artists themselves. So it's important to remember that juries are quite diverse, and not to use, you know, short forms or jargon or slang, or, you know, that maybe the average person wouldn't understand.
Okay.
Okay, well, lots of hot tips. Thank you so much, Isabella and InterArts Matrix. Just delighted again to have you. Thank you so much. And reminder, go sign up to ideaexchange.org and look for the programs and events tab at the top of the website, and you can see our upcoming events, including the grant writing clinic happening next week, August 27th, with Isabella and Sheila from InterArts Matrix. Thanks so much. Thanks for joining us, everyone, and have a great evening. Take good care. Bye now.
Thank you, Gabrielle. Good evening. Bye-bye.